extend a very warm welcome to this, the final lecture of our Gifford Lecture Series at the University of Edinburgh for the academic session 2023 to 2024. My name is Stuart J. Brown. I'm Professor Emeritus of Ecclesiastical History, and I'm Vice Convener of the Gifford Lectureships Committee. And the Gifford Lectures are a renowned lecture series for the exploration of natural theology in its widest sense, including the foundations of morals and social ethics. It is my great honor to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Cornel West, the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Professor of Philosophy and Christian Practice at Union Theological Seminary, New York City, and a renowned philosopher, theologian, public intellectual, and social activist. This evening, he presents his final lecture of this memorable Gifford series on a jazz-soaked philosophy for our catastrophic times, from Socrates to Coltrane. His final lecture is entitled A Love Supreme, A Way Through. And he concludes his powerful portrayal of a jazz-soaked philosophy with a consideration this evening of his own rich tradition of Black love in freedom and Black freedom in love. A tradition that has kept a weary people in a God-forsaken world flowing, he tells us, with styles and smiles. A tradition committed to lifting up every voice, and a tradition that might help us all find a way through our catastrophic times. Professor West, can I now invite you to present the final lecture of your Gifford series?
What a blessing. Indeed, indeed, indeed. Oh, yes. Well, I must say, these 6 lectures have been sublime for me in terms of sustaining my soul. Is that my beloved Anahita and I have been treated with such love, such unbelievable welcome and embrace, and it has been genuine. And it started with my dear brother Jay. He's just such a jewel. And then his wife, Terry. Where's Sister Terry? There she is. Give it up for our dear Sister Terry. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. And I don't want to leave Lisa out either, as lovely as she is. And then just to see all of my precious brothers, sisters, siblings, and friends who were able to come across the pond, and some of them even coming from London. My dear brother Edson made it in from London and gave me these beautiful cufflinks. I told him I've been wearing the same cufflinks for 30 years, but these are Oxford cufflinks, so I might have to work it out and pray for me on that. But in many ways, it is a kind of family reunion, really. There's a beautiful song written by 2 geniuses named Gamble and Huff called Family Reunion by the OJs. It just lifts up a joy in the midst of overwhelming dimness. There's another genius from Philadelphia named Jill Scott sang her version of it to a song written by Sylvia Robinson by the escorts who were incarcerated in Rahway. I've taught in prisons for 51 years. Some of my best teaching actually has been in prisons. And Cynthia Robinson, who went on to become actually the mother of hip hop. She was a producer of Rapper's Delight, 1979, by Sugar Hill Gang. And she also produced the greatest record of the first 4 years of hip hop called The Message by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under, looking for a way through. Catastrophe. Overwhelming? No. Damaging? Yes. A blues people. We thank Leroy Jones and Mary Baraka in his classic. We thank Albert Murray, stomping the blues, towering figure. We thank the inimitable Ralph Waldo Ellison, invoked last night by my dear brother Jeff. We can't talk about the tradition that produced a crack vessel like me without acknowledging those great exemplars who came before, wrestling with finding a way through. And in so many ways, the bedrock text of the tradition that I'm talking about is by this brother. The cover is gone, but it's W.B. Du Bois and Souls of Black Folk of 1903 that begins every chapter with beautiful poetic words and then wordless melodies of golden moments of precious memories. It begins with what? Guttural cries in water, Atlantic Ocean, precious African bodies at the bottom of that ocean. On the way to the then called New World. We begin with guttural cries and wrenching moans and visceral groans to be transfigured and transposed into gestures, language, sound, silence, light. And in so many ways, it's a response to Henry Highland Garnett, who for me is so fundamental. The first time black people had a chance to organize on their own as free Negroes, and they met in Philadelphia, and Henry Highland Garnett had already lost his right leg. So imagine him leaning on his crutch. Probably a little gangster lean. And speaking to these free Negroes, dignified New World Africans. And he says, we black people, we must never confuse our situation with that of the Israelites of the Hebrew scripture or Old Testament for Christians. For black people, Pharaoh is on both sides of the bloody Red Seas. How you gonna come to terms with that predicament? Even the majestic Exodus narrative has to be reshaped. So like Edward Said, you look at it from the vantage point of the Canaanites as opposed to simply the Israelites, looking for a way out. And I could imagine a Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, sitting in the back seat saying, Henry, do you think all hope is gone? All possibility foreclosed? Could somebody sing a song, please? Somebody tell a joke. Moms Mabel and Richard Pryor and Dick Gregory and even Eddie Murphy on a good day. And Monique any day is part of this tradition, speaking to black people's humanity and creativity and genius and talent and intelligence, looking for a way out. There's no accident that Du Bois then moves to, in so many words, in so many ways, a signature Negro spiritual of the 250-some Negro spirituals we have accumulated in this text. It's called Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. And then that last line, glory, hallelujah. See, so much of what I have been talking about in relation to the magnificent wisdom and insights, as well as the limitations of the Western philosophical tradition, beginning with Plato, going all the way through to the present, has to do with that gap between nobody knows the trouble I've seen and the glory, hallelujah. The gap between Pharaoh is on both sides of the bloody Red Seas. And I should add a digression here. Sometimes the pharaohs are black and brown. Sometimes they're semblances of freedom fighters, but not yet tried and true. Henry Highland Garnett, truth teller, justice seeker. And so you can imagine this lecture for me is deeply autobiographical. That's part of my elective affinity with the genius from Harlem named James Baldwin. He can hardly put pen to paper without being autobiographical, without being self-indulgent. And so I always begin with the reality of what it means to be a very, very small wave in an ocean of a great tradition of a great black people. It's not tribal. It's not chauvinistic. It's not parochial. It's not provincial. It is existential. I am who I am because somebody loved me intensely, genuinely, sacrificially, concretely. That's who Irene B. West is, even though she's gone. Part of her afterlife in my life. Clifton West, part of his afterlife in my life. Cliff, Cynthia Sher, on and on and on. Oh, Brother West, you're fetishizing the family. No, I'm just telling you what was poured inside of me that I'm trying to make sure I get out, critically filtered through my philosophical education, but grounded in my spiritual formation. Candor and an honesty, what Antonio Gramsci would call a critical historical self-inventory, his appropriation of Socratic self-examination, to historically situate and locate yourself in the waves of the ocean that has gone into the making of each and every one of us. And I could imagine if we had ours, each one of you would have a personal testimony in regard to your own shaping, in regard to your own formation. That's why any serious talk about a jazz-soaked philosophy has nothing to do with just name-calling and finger-pointing. It has to do with mustering that courage to examine what has gone inside of us, some of it to reject, much of it to hold on for dear life. And so for the 400 years of black people in the New World being so chronically hated, part of our challenge is how could it be that we black people have been able to teach the world so much about love and how to love? That's what Harriet Tubman did when she went back over and over again in the belly of the slavocratic beast in the New World. Deep love, not abstract, not at all, as concrete as a heart attack, as new as foam, and as foundational as a stone. Yes. How in the face of being terrorized for 400 years these black people decide to call for freedom for everybody and not choose to create a black version of the Ku Klux Klan. I tell my vanilla brothers and sisters in the United States, when you see black people, you ought to just give them a standing ovation. Thank you for Frederick Douglass. Thank you for Ida B. Wells. Thank you for A. Philip Randolph. Thank you for Martin Luther King Jr. They didn't have to opt for love and justice. They could have opted for hatred and revenge. And if they did, there'd been a civil war in America every generation. There'd be civil strife every week. America would have gone fascist a long time ago. Still might go fascist this year, next year. We just don't know. And if it does, it won't be the fault of black people, but one minor factor would be that the black people themselves no longer have access to the best of our own tradition. So our love does end up being too tied to hatred, justice too tied to revenge, courage too tied to cowardliness. And when we understand the black freedom tradition as the leaven in the American loaf, when the leaven gets stale, the loaf gets stale. The American empire becomes so thoroughly commodified, thoroughly militarized, thoroughly driven with hubris that we were talking about a few days ago. So what's at stake when we talk about a love supreme is not how much you like Coltrane's song. No, not at all. John Coltrane is a grand wave in an ocean. And he's doing what? Talking about the love warriors in the face of hatred. He's talking about the freedom fighters in the face of terror. He's talking about the wounded healers in the face of trauma and the joy sharers in the face of very deep sorrow. I think the highest moment of a love supreme enacted, and not just for black people, but the highest moment in modern literature, with echoes of the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, is seen in Toni Morrison's Beloved. Nothing like it. This literary musician, this black metaphysician, this Catholic subversive, she's a black sister who's Catholic, very interesting, fascinating. Decides to become a Catholic when she's 7 years old, and her parents are going to AME church, dropping her off at 7. Her real name was Chloe. She named herself after St. Anthony, who took over the educational activities of Francis of Assisi. Francis of Assisi had a profound suspicion of educators like ourselves and others. But St. Anthony fit the bill. And Toni Morrison says, I am Toni. That's where Toni comes from, St. Anthony. And that's the saint of lost things. Right. Invocation, memorializing loss. And how do you come to terms with loss? That's why she loved William Faulkner so much. We were talking about that with the wonderful graduate students yesterday in her MA thesis that she wrote at Cornell University, where Nabokov and Thomas Pynchon and others were there at the same time. Loss in Faulkner, loss in Morrison. And what does she have to say? My God, my God. Let me read about baby Suggs. She says she decided that because slave life had busted her legs, back, head, eyes, hands, kidneys, womb, and tongue, she had nothing left to make a living with but her heart. Pharaoh on both sides. All you have is your humanity to work with. one who visited pulpits and opened her great heart to those who use it. In winter and fall, she carried it to the AMEs, Baptists, holiness, sanctified, the Church of the Redeemer, the redeemed. She was uncalled, unrobed, unanointed. She let her great heart beat in their presence. When warm winter came, baby Suggs, holy, followed by every black man, woman, and child who could make it through. Took a great heart to the clearing. Ooh, remind you of Heidegger's talk about clearing. Very different kind of clearing. We got community here. You have tradition here. You've got connections. You've got relations. These are not isolated philosophic geniuses in conversation with isolated poets putting pen to paper. This is flowing. Very much like the inventor of flow in hip-hop named Rakim. He's the John Coltrane of hip-hop. Flow, groove on the text in the studio. Here's Baby Suggs. A kind of text, to use the language of my dear brother Skip Gates. Originary text. What does she go on to say? She says, a wide open place cut deep in the woods. Nobody knew for what at the end of the path knew only to deer and whoever cleared the land in the first place. In the heat of every Saturday afternoon, she sat in the clearing while the people waited among the trees. After situating herself on a huge flat-sided rock, Baby Suggs bowed her head and prayed silently. The company watched her from the trees. They knew she was ready when she put her stick down, almost like Henry Highland Garnett's crutch. Throw it away, I don't need it. This is a heart-to-heart, soul-to-soul, human-to-human affair. Then she shouted, let the children come. Children, fundamental. Echoes again. Christian New Testament, how rare it is that you have religious figures giving children a priority. Suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of God. Ooh, strange talk. I thought they're supposed to be on the margins. No, childlike, not childish. And the childlikeness shot through all of our hearts and minds and souls in terms of the awe and the wonder and the open-mindedness. And the children ran from the trees toward her. Let your mothers hear you laugh. Oh, we've talked so much about the relation between the catastrophic and the comic. But this is laughter from the stomach. Rabelais-like. This is not Jonathan Swift, cynical satire. This is deep laughter, that delicious chuckle that Du Bois talks about with such delight in Dust of Dawn. And she told him the woods rained. Those looked on could not help smiling. When you read that line, just imagine Billie Holiday singing Strange Fruit, Catastrophe, with the beautiful smile from Baltimore City. Imagine the greatest lament ever produced in the history of the American Empire. The John Coltrane Classic Quartet playing Alabama, responding to the vicious murder of 4 precious girls in the 16th Street Baptist Church by cowardly white supremacist terrorists. McCoy, you sounding so good. What you smiling about? I'm trying to follow Train. He wrote the song and I can feel the tears in the music, and sometimes the notes get in the way of the music. One time they were playing a version some people thought was Alabama. And this was Temple University in November 1966, a few months before Train died. And Train took his saxophone and threw it on the ground, started beating his chest. He said, the instrument's getting in the way. Saxophone is impeding what I got to say. Rashid Ali's on the drum, say, Train, what's happening? something's come over me. I got to express myself, and all these years practicing on this sax, I got to throw it on the ground. Yes, because what? It's not just about the music. As powerful as it is, just like a love supreme is not just about the music. It's about something grander and greater that stands so high and at the same time so low, because it connects musicality to the mundane. Then here come Baby Suggs. Let the grown men come. This is very important. Very important to you. You got a black woman, just like a Toni Morrison. A black woman, just like Mahalia Jackson, Aretha Franklin, Ella Fitzgerald, Carmen McRae, Sarah Vaughan, Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey. We can go on and on and on. And the black literary tradition is the only modern literary tradition that was initiated by women. The poet Phillips Wheatley. The first essayist, Anne Plato. And you say the black sister's last name was Plato? Yes, it was. Maria Stewart, first black person to speak in public. Just like me right now, speaking at the Giffords. I hope and pray that you hear a little Maria Stewart in me, because that's my tradition. And I don't go anywhere without carrying what has been deposited and poured into me. With all of those voices bouncing against my feeble effort to raise my voice to be true to the anthem of black people, of lifting every voice, not lifting every echo of a silo, but a voice that comes from a wrestling with the tradition. Let your wives and your children see you dance, she told them, and ground like shuddered under your feet. Underline that, shuddered. It's almost like Faust in the realm of the mothers in Goethe's classic. To be human is to shudder, to suffer, to struggle, even when Pharaoh is on both sides of the bloody Red Sea. Finally, she called the women to her. Cry, she told them, for the living and the dead. Just cry, just like those guttural cries on the slave ships and the guttural cries that dropped those precious Africans to slave auctions, that took them to slave plantations for 244 years. The average slave would live to be 27 years old and constitute the economic foundations of the American empire, but no reference to slavery in the U.S. Constitution, and you end up fighting a civil war over an institution not invoked in your Constitution. That's called innocence. When yourselves are the authors of the devastation, but can't say a word about the devastation and those human beings who are devastated. Denial, evasion, we've talked about that before. And without covering their eyes, the women let loose. And that's a beautiful thing. That's another way of saying they were swinging. That's part of what I meant by trying to make the Gifford Lectures swing. You see, because what is going on here is intimately connected to who I am and what I do and what I say and how I say it. Not because I'm so X or Y. No, that kind of arrogance, that kind of condescension has got to go. But rather because I cannot be what John Coltrane called the force for good that I can be without being rooted critically in the best of what went into me and then learning to love myself in a culture that teaches black people to hate themselves, violate themselves, flagellate themselves, tells black people they're less beautiful, less moral, less intelligent, most importantly tells black people to be afraid, walk around intimidated, laughing when it ain't funny, scratching when it don't itch. Or as Paul Laurence Dunbar says, wearing the mask as you engage in upward mobility in white spaces. Baldwin says what in his classic To Fire Next Time? It's love that forces us to take off the mask. We know we cannot live within, but fear we cannot live without. What breaks the back of fear? What breaks the back of feeling so scared and intimidated, resulting in cowardly behavior? A love supreme, concretized. A love supreme, felt, body, heart, mind, spirit. A love supreme, enacted in relation, enacted in connection. It started that way, laughing children, dancing men, crying women. Then it got mixed up. Women started crying and danced. Men sat down and cried. Children danced. Women laughed. Children cried until exhausted and driven, all of each lay about the clearing, damp and gasping for breath in the silence that followed. You see, we black folk didn't need Philip Glass to teach us about silence. We appreciate the brother, you know. But when you're a jazz woman or a blues man, the silence between the notes can mean as much as the notes, especially when you got the right notes with the right timing tied to the right kind of silence that speaks to your soul and others. Baby Sug Holy offered up to them her great big heart. She didn't tell them to clean up their lives or go and sin no more. She didn't tell them they were the blessed of the earth, its inheriting meek or its glory bound pure. She told them the only grace they could have was the grace they could imagine. Think back, Vico. Memory tied to remembering. And what is remembering? A gathering of that which is dismembered, that which is dispersed. Your own self, your own history, your own past, your own heritage, completely either rendered invisible, degraded, devalued, or dispersed. And to remember is to reconnect it. That's why you need a synagogic imagination to alter it. And then, of course, the ingenuity that we saw in Vico, which is improvisational form of practical wisdom. She told them that if they could not see it, they could not have it. Here, she said, in this your place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it hard. Yonder they do not love your flesh. They despise it. Love your hands, love them, raise them up. Kiss them, touch others with them, pat them together, stroke them on your face because they don't have that love either. You got to love it, you, and no, you ain't in love with your mouth yonder out there. They see it broken and break it again. What you say out of it, they will not heed. What you scream from it, they do not hear. You got to love it. This is flesh I'm talking about, flesh that needs to be loved. And she goes on and on, all the different parts of the body. It ends up saying this, your prize, love your heart. Saying no more, she stood up then and danced with her twisted hip the rest of what her heart had to say. So now she's communicating far beyond language with her body. You see, that's kinetic orality, passionate physicality, combative spirituality, but a tenacity of a vision that looks like it has the chance of a snowball in hell. How are these black folk gonna overcome the entrenched interest, the organized greed, the institutionalized hatred? Watch them love and laugh and organized and sacrificed, and some crushed, but others bounce back. That's part of the message for our precious Palestinian brothers and sisters in Gaza right now. Don't think that somehow just a short picture discloses all the possibilities and modalities. No, not at all. History is always incomplete and unfinished. It's always unpredictable. Hold on to your courage, your determination, she says. I want to end this, and she says, while the others opened their mouths and gave her the music. Long notes held until the 4-part harmony was perfect enough for their deeply loved flesh. That's like in the back seat of the Henry Highland Garnet lecture. Can somebody sing a song? Please sing it in tune. We need to write notes now. You see, Nat King Cole, the clarity and perspicacity of your pronunciation can save our souls and help us to fortify ourselves. Johnny Hartman, Luther Vandross, Donny Hathaway, Curtis Mayfield, Chaka Khan, Prince. These are not just names. These are fortifiers, love warriors, freedom fighters, joy sharers for people who are told they have absolutely no chance whatsoever, and then make it available to the world because they've loved themselves so genuinely but also self-critically that it connects with all human beings who have to come to terms with catastrophe, closure in their lives, and need fluidity, who need flexibility, who need improvisational sensibility to somehow give them not so much a hope in the abstract, because I'm in some ways with Thucydides on hope when it comes to his reflections in the Million Dialogue. He says the worst thing people need sometimes is a certain kind of hope, because you leave yourself naked and vulnerable and you get crushed, just like the genocide in Milos and the debate over it. Even hope itself has to be timed in the right way, with the right kind of hope that's tied to kinesis, motion, and movement, rooted in the right kind of kairos. We were talking about that yesterday. Not just any kairos, not just some thunderbolt from above. No, not at all. It's got to be honed out day in and day out from one generation to the next. And let me say this. One of the reasons why Toni Morrison's beloved is such a grand exemplar of Coltrane's A Love Supreme, or Louis Armstrong's, or Duke Ellington's. And we thank Sister Farrah Jasmine Griffin in her readings, because in many ways she is the Toni Morrison what Jerry Allen is to Mary Lou Williams. She's the adopted daughter and the finest reader. And what that means is it's a tradition always in need of revision. And what this text does, not just for Black people, but all human beings concerned about what it means to be human, is to simultaneously enact the 5 most fundamental forms of drama in the human condition. Now, drama is conflict, critically reflected upon, and emotionally felt. And drama is always dynamic and in movement, in motion. But there's erotic drama of wrestling with love in whatever form. Man, woman, man to man, woman to woman, but erotic at its deepest level. Then there is the generational drama of the young against the old, like Turgenev's Fathers and Sons. Then there's the social drama of persons over against the powers that be. That's the one that took over in the 19th century in many ways in Europe as it was slowly beginning its own decay and decline. Novels of Stendhal or Balzac and others. But then there's the ritualistic drama of what is our relation to the dead, the relation of the quick and the dead and the living and the gone. Where Vico begins, burial, we've got to make sure that they have recognition. Just like when you blow your horn, you got to make sure you are acknowledging those who came before with a dignity. That's the dignity in Coltrane's sound, or Ornette Coleman's sound. There's a connection between the living and the dead because they know they didn't find their voices without listening closely to the voices of the dead. Strong message for our younger generation. Should I read some of the text these days of my precious young folk? It's hard to find footnotes more than 3 years old of the text that they read. And I say, hey, what's going on? This is a very diminished oligarchy. If only people you're referring to are the people who are living. If all we had to depend on are the people who are living, we'd all go under. Even though we got some wise people in this audience and other places. I don't want to put that down. But it's the larger picture, as Sonny Rollins told me when we had our wonderful interview, and he said he and Train used to talk right when they were having trouble, so they spent a lot of time together. He said, Train always talked about the bigger picture, Brother West. The bigger picture. You come out with giant steps, and the critics say you don't know how to play your instruments because you're playing notes so fast it can't be transposed on the page. Something must be wrong with you. No, maybe something's wrong with the critic. You keep doing what you're doing in light of your calling, in light of your vocation, but always be open to growing. Yes, indeed. But then the last drama, it is a metaphysical drama, and it has to do with one's relation to forces bigger than one's self. It's very interesting that Toni Morrison herself, and I call her a black metaphysician because she herself has a definition of this. This is in her classic she published, The Source of Self-Regard. She's talking about Zula. Zula was fascinating, profound, complicated figure in her first novel. She said, I always thought of Zula as quintessentially black, metaphysically black. Toni, what do you have in mind? Maimonides, no. Aquinas, no. Whitehead, no. Well, then what do you have in mind, Toni? She says, let's be honest. She says, I speak my own mind on my own terms in conversation with Aquinas to Whitehead. I'm talking back just as they talk to me on egalitarian terms. What is next? What does she say next? She says, it has nothing to do with melanin. Certainly not unquestioning fidelity to the tribe. Zula is a new world black and new world woman extracting choice from choicelessness. Two sides of the bloody Red Sea. Responding inventively to found things, those given things that we all have to negotiate with and wrestle with. She is improvisational, daring, disruptive, imaginative, modern, out of the house, outlawed, unpolicing, uncontained, uncontainable. Now that's my theme of Atopos. Unclassifiable, unsubsumable, individuality cultivated, but always in relation to community. And so much of what Toni is talking about really has to do with one of the very difficult things to achieve. And this is true not just for any human being, but it's certainly difficult for black people, black writers, black intellectuals, black philosophers. And it's something that I've been thoroughly blessed with. What Toni says this. She says, I've always myself felt most alive, most alert, and most sterling among my own people. All my creative energy comes from there. My stimulation for any artistic effort at all originates there. The compulsion to write, even to be, begins with my consciousness of, experience with, and even my awe of Black people, and the quality of our lives as lived, not perceived. Now, some people might read that and say, oh my God, it sounds chauvinistic to me, it sounds tribalistic to me. Not at all. Not at all. James Joyce can escape from Ireland all he wants, but as my dear, dear brother Owen knows so well, he carries it with him to Treves, he carries it with him to Rome, he carries it with him, obsessed with Ireland. Nothing wrong with that. But he knows the parochial and provincial dimensions of where he left. But he knows there's something so rich and so valuable that sustains him and preserves his sanity and preserves his dignity. All of my instincts tell me that both as a writer and as a person, any total surrender to another culture will destroy me. And yet she goes right on to say, she said, I at least do not intend to live without Aeschylus, without William Shakespeare, or James, or Twain, or Hawthorne, or Melville, etc., etc., etc. Writing a dissertation on Virginia Woolf and Faulkner and D.H. Lawrence, who gets so disrespected these days, understandably at times, but he has so much to say. There must be some way to enhance canon readings without enshrining them. That's what she's talking about. That's very much what these Gifford Lectures have been. That's my feeble effort, you see. And in so many ways, I think if I can come anywhere near the magnificent tribute that Toni Morrison gives to James Baldwin, on December the 8th, 1987, I was there. I was sitting next to somebody who loves Black people nearly more than anybody I ever met. His name was Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture. Whatever your critique of his ideology, I was blessed to travel with him all around the country, and I invited him to Princeton and got in deep trouble, but that's all right. I don't mind. I'm a truth seeker and a justice seeker. And he and I had deep disagreements, but I know he's deep in his heart. And his closest friend was who? Martin Luther King Jr. He loved Martin more than he could say. And he'd tell me that over and over and over again. And he and I would always reflect on the story that Daddy King told us when he said Martin Luther King Jr. was in a paddy wagon, which is a police car, for 4.5 hours, taking him from ATL, A-Town, Atlanta, to Reidsville Prison. 4.5 hours in the dark, with a German Shepherd there barking every moment of the way. And Daddy King's waiting there for his son, and Martin walks out of that paddy wagon. He could not walk a straight line. All he could say was, this is the cross we must bear for the freedom of our people. Yes, cruciform, as Gardner Taylor would put it. Cruciform love, embodied, enacted, willing to serve, emptying oneself. Yes, indeed, but still fortified with that beautiful smile that Martin had. Martin, how do you keep loving these folk when you give the eulogy for the 4 children? Coltrane will use his eulogy as the basis of Alabama and then do another version called Martin Luther King Jr. 1966. Is that right, Brother Andre? Using the speech, using the language, almost like the end of Richard Strauss's last great classical opera, Capriccio. What's the last moment? What is the greatest, poetry or instrumental music? Maybe it's the human voice itself. Just like Church of Christ. No instruments a cappella. The voice itself, unmediated with all the various accompaniments that the instruments provide. Interesting. Here's what Toni says about Baldwin. 3 gifts you gave me. You gave me a language to dwell in. I've been thinking your spoken and written words so long, I believe they were mine. I've been seeing the world through your eyes so long, and I had to struggle to find my own. I pored over your 6,895 pages of your published work to acknowledge the depth. Thank you for the credit. You made English honest, genuinely international. You exposed its secrets, reshaped it until it was truly modern, dialogic, representative, humane. You stripped it of ease, false comfort, fake innocence, evasion, hypocrisy. You gave us undecorated truth, ungated it for black people. Look at that verb. You got to be a blues woman to come up with a verb like that. Ungated it. You know, we tell our freshmen, just say open. No, you in a different zone. You ungated it for me. You replaced lumbering platitudes with an upright elegance. Whoo, that sounds like Phyllis Hyman before she died. You went into that forbidden territory and decolonized it, robbed it of the jewel of its naivete. And in order to accommodate our complicated passion, you accented not our vanities, which we have, but our intricate, difficult, demanding beauty, our tragic, insistent knowledge, our lived reality, our sleek, classical imagination. It infuriated a lot of people. Then she moves to the second, your courage. The courage to live life in and from its belly as well as beyond its edges. To see, right back where we started. To see, to feel, to hear, to listen, to act. To recognize and identify evil, but never fear or stand in awe of it. It's a courage that came from a ruthless intelligence, married to a pity so profound it could convince anybody who cared to know that those who despise us need the moral authorities of their former slaves. Boy, that's Toni. When that unassailable combination of mind and heart, of intellect and passion was on display, it guided us through treacherous landscape. And then the last gift was one of tenderness. In many ways, I think I want to end on this one. Because when you talk about love supreme, freedom supreme, joy supreme, healing supreme, we often say that justice is what love looks like in public, but tenderness is what love feels like in private. And kindness, Baldwin himself said he never met a more gentle man than Malcolm X. Look at the difference between the public perception of Malcolm and the feelings tied to what Malcolm's truth-telling was having on black people. Now, it took Malcolm a while to acknowledge white humanity. We know that. We know white brothers and sisters are not devils. That was just his way of keeping track of the devilish behavior of white brothers and sisters. He was wrong to make that kind of ontological claim, but the evidence was overwhelming in terms of the devilish behavior. Because the evidence is overwhelming for every nation and empire and continent across the board, right back to our common humanity. He said, oh, how I loved your love. You knew this then is no calamity, no. This is a jubilee. Our crown, you said, have already been bought and paid for. All we have to do is wear it, and we do, Jimmy. You crowned us in a Christocentric way, because there is no crown without a cross. There's no service, sacrifice, genuine love supreme, without being willing to not only get outside of yourself, Socratically criticize yourself, prophetically bear witness to the best self inside of you in light of a larger tradition, and then say that I'm not a Messiah, or I'm not in any way an indispensable force for good. I'm just another cracked vessel. Or as my vacation Bible school teacher, Sarah Ray, would say, little Cornel, wherever you go, even at the Gifford Lectures, if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave a little heaven behind. That's what the truth-telling and justice-seeking is all about. That's why it's cruciform. That's why it's historically oriented. And that's why it's one in which you keep track of all the various forms of domination and dogma and death. From the patriarchy to homophobia, the transphobia, the anti-Arab, the anti-Palestinian, the anti-Muslim, the anti-Christian, anti-black, across the board. That's not empty humanistic universality. That's what it means to live a life of a love supreme. One last story about John Coltrane, and I'll end. John Coltrane was in high school. He was an only child. Both grandfathers were reverends at the AME Zion Church. But he was closest to Reverend William Blair, who was born a slave and ended up one of the great freedom fighters in the history of North Carolina. He went to jail and was chased out of the state, came back. But within a matter of months, he lost his father, he lost his grandfather, and he lost his favorite aunt. And he's an only child, and he only got his cousin Mary as a friend. That beautiful song he dedicated to her. And he starts blowing his horn. I was talking to cousin Mary one time with my dear brother in Philadelphia. He starts blowing his horn. He's blowing his horn like he can bring them back. Discipline, self-invested discipline, trying to work through all of the inner anguish and agony of his own catastrophic situation as a young teenager. And his mother has to go to Philadelphia and work as a domestic maid, just like my grandmother, working in white households, dealing with sexual violations and so forth. And he moves to Philadelphia finally. And he's living in the projects on the chocolate side of town. And he does the same thing. He just keeps practicing all day and all night. And his beloved mother, Alice, said, John, I think you're going to have to cut back on that a little bit, though, brother. These urbanites, these city folk, you know, they don't have the same level of embrace that we have down in North Carolina. And the committee gets together and says, no, Mr. Coltrane, y'all got to leave the projects. This little Negro's making too much noise. And the day before they had to leave, knock on the door. And there is the black minister. They don't even know him. He said, I heard that you all are getting kicked out of the projects because you got a little Negro in here that is undisciplined in terms of playing too much. So he said, no, he's highly disciplined. He just has his timing off. And he said, he just dropped the key. That's the key to my church. You give that to little John, and he can play anytime he wants, any time of the day, all week, other than Sunday morning and Sunday evening, and prayer meeting on Wednesdays at night. The train took the key. You can imagine Alice, love supreme, hung at that little brother. And he practiced in the church as long as he wanted. A love supreme, acknowledgement, resolution, resoluteness, pursuit, psalm, gratitude. There is no John Coltrane love supreme without that anonymous Negro preacher. And Coltrane never forgot that, ever. Grounded in that very, very concretized, individualized love tied to a freedom, tied to a joy, tied to, yes indeed, a healing. So even when Pharaoh is on both sides of the bloody Red Seas, lo and behold, that doesn't mean that that's the end of the story. Thank you all so very much. God bless you. 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 Lord, 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 Lord. God bless you. Good God Almighty. Appreciate you. Appreciate you. Appreciate you. Appreciate you. God bless you. Lord, 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 Lord. God bless you. Read, brother. Lord, 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 Lord. Oh, yeah. Tied together. We love you, Coltrane. Lord, 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 Lord. Our love supreme, our love supreme, our love supreme, our love supreme. Ooh, he did that 19 times. Supreme, our love 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 supreme. Oh, yeah. Oh, he loves to bring Oh, Lord, Lord, Lord. My brother, my
What
brother.
a finish, what a finish.
Good God Almighty.
Oh, what an ending. A love supreme, joy supreme, a healing supreme. You can come back and lecture to us anytime. We've got a little time for questions. Does anyone have a question? Yes.
First of all, I want to say thank you so much for standing up for Palestine. We need as many people to talk about it as possible. Yeah, thank you. So my question is about Black American poetry. You started the lecture series talking about death and catastrophe and younger generations having issues sort of dealing with that. In the past few sessions, you were talking about the three main elements of jazz: catastrophe, swing, improvisation. So my question is, in the context of Black American poetry, in the context of death, and talking about death perhaps under, by the hand of white authoritative brutality, how would you say that these three elements evolved, let's say from Phyllis Wheatley to the Harlem Renaissance to Coltrane to Amiri Baraka, and then ending it with how you started today's lecture, Jill Scott and hip hop?
Appreciate the question, but we need a long seminar on that query. You know that very, very much so, because Phyllis Wheatley, of course, is a fascinating, towering figure of great complications and complexity. Very much still tied to the dominant discourse of the day, and yet still wrestling with her own humanity as a woman and a Black woman who had been enslaved, but then transmissioned and so on. But when you think of some of the, for me, some of the figures who are worth wrestling with, I would probably say first Gwendolyn Brooks would be someone who, over time, from the south side of Chicago, Brownsville, who starts off as very much a mainstream poet, just like James Baldwin is a mainstream essayist vis-a-vis the white mainstream, and breaks with the Black Arts Movement, Haki Mahabute and some of the towering figures in a very important way. In fact, we were just together at my dear brother Flager's church, and of course he's been tied to struggles, the National Black United Front, Black nationalist struggles with Reverend Herbert Daltrey of House of Lower Pentecostal Church and so on. And she makes this radical break to do what? To remain tied to the younger generation. In the same way John Coltrane chooses not Red Garland, but McCoy Tyner, younger generation, Eric Dolphy, younger generation, you see. Of course, Elvin Jones and Reggie Workman and Jimmy Garrison have their own unbelievable status and what have you. But he was making that connection. And so she would be the first one to come to mind in terms of being willing to make that unbelievable sacrifice. Most professionals, no matter what color they are, once they procure a certain high status, she won the Yale Prize at the, one of my dear beloved poets, W.H. Auden. He's one of my favorites, but he was on the committee to choose her, but that's very Yale, mainstream. Auden's in New York. When she makes the break, people think she's lost her mind. Just like when James Baldwin makes the break, they think he's lost his mind. You see, that's the kind of thing, the kind of disruptions, this kind of Kairos-like interruptions tied to ways of sustaining your interruption over time, I would want to highlight. But it's true. I mean, when I talk about Rakim as a John Coltrane of hip hop, you know, you Paid in Full is a poetic work of art. Now, I was blessed to teach in an institution called Timbuktu that we founded in Brooklyn, House of Lord Pentecostal Church, Reverend Herbert Daltrey, 415 Atlantic Avenue is where it's located. And I would lecture every Wednesday just like this, and we have a nice crowd. And there was always one brother sitting there with his blessed mother named Finney. His name was Tupac Shakur. He was 10 years old. I can see his eyes right now. Who knew that whatever words we were saying and I was saying, and he was always kind enough to make my lecture, so I felt I had to up the ante, because I think I tend to peak in my lecturing between kindergartners and 11 years old. I really do. That's when Brother Owen gave me his wonderful book on youth. What's his name? St. Johnny, is that the name of it, my brother? St. Johnny? St. Johnny. Absolutely, St. Johnny. How do you connect with the children? Because the children can see fakes and phonies and frauds right away. Well, I want to talk about decolonization and the various ways in which it's talked to community. What are you saying, Brother West? Well, I see that you're tied to a certain kind of clothes, and I see that you're always looking at how other people are dressed. I think life is more than that. Oh, I see. Yes, keep the language as clear and concrete and succinct as you can, and then make some jokes so that they don't go to sleep on you. You know what I mean? Communication in all of its forms. And so when I think of poets in hip hop, you know, I would think of a Rakim, I would think of I talked about Rhapsody last night, I would think of a Tupac Shakur, and of course the greatest ones would be Biggie and Jay-Z, even though I have to qualify that brother. But the art is still unbelievable. And of course we won't get into Kanye, but he's not my cousin. But his art is still quite powerful. He's just so confused and xenophobic and a whole host of other things we can spend a lot of time on. But the poetry comes in different forms. We just lost one of the last poets. See, Gil Scott-Heron. Crucial forms of poetry in that regard, you see. So that's the beginning of an answer to your question. You can imagine that's a long trajectory. Yeah, oh, no, well, I appreciate it, very much so. I know this brother's been trying to get in for a long time.
Professor West, thank you so much for such an incredible journey over the last 6 lectures. You've taken us from Michel de Montaigne to Toni Morrison, and certainly today brought back many happy memories of Princeton in the 1990s. I wanted to ask you about, I've been struck by, the references to piety and to love and to responsibility. And I wanted to get your view on, it's a tricky question. I guess we're very privileged in this arena,
right,
that we are able to listen to you, and we have these erudite cultural references that have certainly for me helped me to cope with issues around the place of people of color in the world and the place of thinking and philosophy in response to catastrophe. But that really provokes a question for me as to, what do we do with this privilege? Because the people who could perhaps most benefit from your response to catastrophe and through your metaphor of jazz are probably not in this room and never will be. And how do we take your music? How do we take your approach to dealing with catastrophe through such an incredible tapestry of references? How do each of us in our own way, once we leave this room today, take that forward and, if you like, democratize that to reach a wider audience? I just want to know how we, in our small way, can do a bit of good, taking inspiration from this incredible journey you've led us on.
Wow, thank you for those very kind and generous words, my dear brother. And we do have precious memories from Princeton years ago. But no, I think that, again, we all have our distinctive callings, and we all have our distinctive ways in which we execute that calling. I myself, because I believe in going to people, so I teach in prisons, I speak in churches. I'm not a minister. I've got too much gangster in me to be a minister. But I try to be a decent lay Christian. And I speak in mosque. I love my prophetic brothers. Well, try to love everybody, but I zero in on the prophetic Islamic brothers and sisters. I speak in synagogues with my prophetic Jewish brothers and sisters, but try to love everybody. Buddhists, of course, Bell Hooks I was blessed to work with and write a book with. She's Buddhist to the core, right? So I like to go to places. It could be in the jails. It could be in those civic institutions, community centers. Or it could be on the stage. I mean, Arturo O'Farrill, I should mention, who was one of the grand jazz musicians, head of the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra, that we made an album that just won a Grammy a year and a half ago, right, called 4 Questions Coming Out of Du Bois. I did spoken word for 17 minutes on that album, and we travel all around the country on stages. So that for me, I go where people are. That's why we made the 3 albums that we made. I'll never forget with my brother Clifton and with Prince and with Gerald Levert, the greatest soul singer of his generation, with Talib Kweli and Rod Digger and a whole host of Andre 3000 and others, because you try to go where people are and try to then speak a language that gets inside of their world. You got to step outside of yourself, outside of your own skin, walk a mile in their shoes, and say, I see. This is how I can best communicate. Now, I don't think everybody needs to do that. Everybody's got, their own time and whatever energy and they have. So if, for example, the best thing one can do is to teach these magnificent courses at University of Edinburgh and go home and take a nap, you're still doing something. And you have an impact on those precious folk there. You see, you don't need to try to do everything. And of course, I'm always encouraged by my beloved wife. You can't do everything, man. I say, well, I can try to do more than I'm doing. No, you're not a spring chicken no more. Huh? No, she doesn't say that, but the love is there. But the important thing is that don't think that you just have to imitate somebody else. I tell my graduate students that all the time. Be true to yourself in light of your own self-critical engagement of who you are over time and space. Don't ossify or petrify, but recognize you're not here to be imitating somebody else at all. And I think that's one of the great lessons of jazz, right? If Coltrane's going to imitate Johnny Hodges for the rest of his life, then he's going to be an extension of Johnny Hodges. That's how he started. But Monk and Miles and others said, no, Train, you got your own voice. Let's see it. Earl Bostic, Gene Hammond, Big Marbell, Johnny Hodges, Dizzy Gillespie. Those are all the bands he gets before he gets to Miles, before he gets to his own. And then thinking about working with Sun Ra. Now, when Train breaks from his own metered music to non-metered music and goes free jazz, people walk out on him. He goes to some clubs, there's only 7 people there. He just put out My Favorite Things, was a bestseller. He didn't care, he was true to his own calling. He wasn't there just to make money. He believed what Sun Ra and others were doing was very important. And Sun Ra used to start most of his performances with what? Black people have tried everything possible. It's time to try the impossible. Come with me on the mothership. And that's before George Clinton and Bootsy and them got on the mothership. Come with me on the orchestra. I just got back from Pluto last night. I can take you to Saturn. You see. And Saturn means what? Chronos. What's Chronos? Certain kind of time. I can give you some Kairos in Chronos. Just listen to this concert for two hours. And you kind of look at him strange at the beginning, and at the end of the concert, you look down and say, dang, I've been levitating. The brother got a point. He took me somewhere. He took me somewhere. Well, that's very important. That's what Monk used to tell everybody before they got on the stage. We're going to lift this stage tonight. And when I was blessed to travel the country with Bootsy Collins, who wrote 2 songs with him, he'd always ask me to pray right before we hit the stage. And we'd say, we want to say exactly what James Brown used to say to his band. We're going to leave everything that we have inside of us on that stage because we want to enable the people. We're an extension of them and they're an extension of us. And if we don't play a song that they came to play, we're going to play it, just like James would say. For 4 hours, he would go straight. Did anybody come here to hear a song that we didn't play? You didn't play Soul Power. Hit it, Bootsy. We're going to play for this, sister. Stand up, sister. How come? We come to serve. We don't come to be spectacles. We come to give ourselves, to empty ourselves. We don't come to just be commodities, to be looked at and say, oh my God, these great celebrities. This is part of the challenge of young folk these days. And we've got some towering figures of young folk, but the commodification is so intense that sometimes they think just showing up is a show. You say, no, sing a song, God dang it. I made it, I'm here, you want to see me? Pick up the microphone, sing a song. We come for performance. Performance is not just cheap entertainment, it authorizes a better future. That's August Wilson from the chocolate side of Pittsburgh. He's a blues man to the core, and the follower of Bearden, the great blues painter, and Baraka himself. That's part of the same tradition that we're talking about, and in that sense, everybody has to find their own way through, even as we're trying to enable each one of us to get through so that collectively we can constitute a threat to unjust status quos as well as trembling and shuddering souls that each and every one of us have. That was a long answer to your question. I'm sorry about that though, brother. But
Maybe one more.
oh,
Yes, in the back.
Oh, we can end up with Colin. We can end up with Colin. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Good evening, Dr. West.
How you doing, my dear
my
brother?
question is a little bit personal in that I'm asking for me.
Yeah.
And you talked about the kinetic kind of nature of moving through, and just as a young Black person, I find it's difficult to kind of connect with the past and with people like a Coltrane, just because I wasn't alive when he was there and when he was, popping and singing his music and things like that.
Right.
And so my question is just, how do you, as a young person, try to go back and look back, because I know the pillars and the people that kind of brought us this far on the journey and things like that, and what my parents have poured into me. Yeah. But I think others still have that kind of, there's still a disconnect with the past. How do you kind of grab that in the era of, the Beyoncés, the Meg Thee Stallions, the Futures, all of those kind of poets now? How do we take back those lessons while also still keeping true to what we have here in the present?
It's a powerful question, my brother. I'm so glad you raised that. We're going to take some time on that, too. Because, you keep in mind that every generation has quotation from the past. Everyone. Rapper's Delight started with Chic. You remember that? Biggie's in love with James Brown, Isley Brothers. And you could be listening to Biggie, James is dead, the funk is real and powerful. Snoop Dogg, in love with the Dramatics, one of the deepest soul groups in the history of modernity, with Ron Banks and DJ Reynolds. Snoop actually uses their samples, and they make more money on Snoop than they made in their whole career. Which is to say what? Which is to say that part of the wrestling that you're talking about is already part and parcel and integral to what's going on in the present. Because we know hip-hop was part of a war against young black people, especially black brothers. He eliminated all the instruments. Marcellus and myself worked on that, learning through the arts program, because they eliminated all the instruments in New York City. And we had a wonderful sister, Natalie Lieberman, our dear Jewish sister, who provided the monies, and Marcellus and I would go to all these different high schools and make sure they had instruments based on her money, because once you eliminate all the instruments, there's no accident you're going to have folk who can't play the instruments, and therefore they're going to go to the records and sample the records. Their genius will be manifested in other ways. But it's a vicious attack on young people to dumb down their music, to make it difficult for them to connect with the best of their past, and they went around it anyway. And then they had the kinetic orality of so many black preachers, not necessarily tied to Jesus, but sometimes it is. But Rakim's a Muslim. All of them part of a heterogeneity and diversity of religious sensibility, right? So in that sense, the president's always already constitutive of the past. See, that's T.S. Eliot's tradition of individual talent, tied together. When you intervene, even the past is understood differently now. You listen to the Dramatics, that's Snoop's group. No, it's not. They had their own group before Snoop mobilized them. And you can imagine all the other figures, the J. Coles and the others who are using past music. So then you have to choose, which ones you will connect with and then follow through with in terms of who these earlier voices really are. Think, for example, in terms of eloquence. Does Malcolm X's voice strike you as relevant? You could listen to Malcolm all night tonight. His jokes and everything, even when you disagree. You say, Malcolm, I think you're a classic. I think you've got some perennial wrestling and issues. It's not outdated. Fannie Lou Hammond would be the same way. Ella Baker would be the same way. Toni Morrison's gone now. When I was reading those texts, though, brother, did it hit you? Did you feel it? You see what I mean? It's a beautiful thing. Now, I know it hurts, though, It's supposed to hurt. That's called education. It's true. Existential vertigo. Ontological dizziness. Recognizing, at least for a moment, your worldview rests on pudding. That's called paideia. That's called education. Then you surprise yourself. I've still got something I'll fall back on. You're going to step out on nothing and land on something. Then you're stronger and strong. How old are you, my brother? 26. 26. Oh, yeah, you got a wonderful life coming. You indeed, all that joy and freedom and love going to come your way. So don't feel as if It's a problem. It's already at work in your life. It's just a matter of teasing out the ways in which it's operating. That's the crucial thing. That's the point, I think, and that's why I'm so glad he raised that question. I know Brother Colin wanted to raise one last question. It's so good to have you here, though, brother, as well.
So first of all, and most importantly, I just want to thank you and Anahita for just the love and the kindness you've shown me since I've been here. I just met you both for the first time in Edinburgh, and you treated me like family instantly, and it's been really special. So thank you. Thank you. My question, though. So you told us you were going to hit us on 3 different levels of analysis: the genealogical, the existential, and the pedagogical. The existential and the genealogical, they've been hit for sure, but I wanted to know more about this pedagogical level of what's going on and the curricular implications of a jazz-soaked philosophy. I've heard you say that you wish early modern philosophy began with Erasmus instead of Descartes, and that really struck me. And I just want to know more about how you envision kind of the field of philosophy in the world of academia. That's my venue, I guess, and how you would imagine the curriculum changing through how you view this jazz-soaked philosophy.
Thank you so much, dear brother. It really has been a joy to meet you and revel in your spirit and so on as a young brother, just like our young brother in the back here. Now remember now, by pedagogical, we're talking about the larger issues of paideia, which is both deep education that has implications for schooling and curriculum. But when I think of paideia, you see, I don't think of curriculum right away, especially in the jazz tradition. You see, that's why Miles Davis dropped out of Juilliard, right? He said, they're doing interesting things, but Charlie Parker's downtown, and I want to learn from a master. So my paideia will be shaped without necessarily tied to a curriculum. James Baldwin never went to college. At least 2 colleges went through him because he's self-educated in that way. So that's still paideia. When we actually look at formal schooling trying to deal with paideia, and especially these days, highly professional, commodified, corporatized, specialized schooling that makes it difficult to get to the issues of death, dogma, domination, and when it is inserted, it too often takes a form that is so far removed from some of the conversations that have been going on. Because the market, of course, is concerned with newness, novelty, profit, profit, newness, novelty, profit, profit. That's the worst thing you could ever have for any serious paideia. You see what I mean? So that when it comes to curriculum, the question becomes, well, how do we try to remain true to our understandings of what I'm calling moral and spiritual greatness as well as intellectual excellence, and then filter it through these halls? I've always been upset that music has not been given the prominence place that it ought to have in education across the board. In the history of fighting white supremacy in the American empire, music played a much more important role than churches and law. We mentioned before the Communist Party was the first ones to integrate, and they got in deep problems because they had some interracial dancing that some of the white brothers had trouble with. They hadn't fully absorbed their Marxism. But the Communist Party forced it on them. The next thing you know, they began to go with the flow. YMCA, YWCA was still segregated. But listen to the music. You got some white brothers and sisters start listening to Louis Armstrong and Earl Father Hines and talking about, wait, they say these black folk are not intelligent. Somebody's lying to me. All of this genius taking place. And when I was in Charlottesville, where we had some real sick white vanilla brothers, neo-Nazis and Ku Klux Klan. You all remember Charlottesville a few years ago? And I was there with the young folk talking about this little light of mine about to get crushed like cockroaches. And I walked by the park of the Klan and the neo-Nazis, and they listening to Motown, Stevie Wonder. I because they'd been Afro-Americanized as young folk musically, but they didn't get the right memo. But it still spoke to them. It's fascinating. It still spoke to them. And the Klan itself used to be anti-Jewish and Catholic and black, and now you got a Catholic head of a major branch of the Klan. That's upward mobility American style. Oh no, it's true. We could easily end up with a Jewish brother and a black brother head of the Klan. Because in the end, it's not even a question of just skin pigmentation. You got folk who hate blackness and them have to be black. And of course, one of the points I was making with Toni Morrison is, there's not a whole lot of people who really love folk. And there's not a whole lot of people who really love black people. And there's not a whole lot of black people who really love black people. Toni Morrison was one. Coltrane was another. Deep love. Baldwin was another with more torment and torture given his beginnings. But there's a whole lot of folk who talk about blackness this and blackness that, a professor of blackness and so forth. And then they run into a black person in downtown and treat them like they nothing. And you say, hey, we were born at night, but not last night. This is a Keith Sweating moment. Something just ain't right. The challenge, the existential level, how deep your love really is. And so it is when it comes to curriculum, that philia, Sophia, philo, Sophia, right? That eros, that even agape for those of us holding on to Christian legacies and so on, you see. And so in that way, that essay that Toni Morrison writes on canon that I was reading about how she can bring in Aeschylus and Shakespeare, affirming without enshrining. She has a tremendous respect and even an awe for them, but she also has a deep love, respect, and awe for Jamal and Letitia around the corner in light of tradition that they themselves are building on. That's the kind of openness, multi-contextualism, deeper than multiculturalism. Because you can be multicultural and everybody in the context is still professional managerial class. They're just different colors or at the top of the empire. The winners of the empire, the winners of the corporate globalization. So you get all these different colors, but the same class structures in place, same imperial structures in place. You just got folk at the UN raising their hand to deny resolutions when it comes to precious Palestinian brothers and sisters. And they black as me. In fact, Linda's more beautiful than me, but she's wrong in her vote. That's the kind of thing you want to always keep track of if you're going to try to build a jazz soap philosophy that's tied to a moral and spirituality and an intellectuality of greatness and excellence, and then that deep love supreme, which has to do with opening yourself and others. But you all have been so kind. Thank you so very much.
Sit down for a minute, rest your legs.
All right. My dear brothers.
Well, you have a seat next to your beloved wife.
Oh, all right.
A few moments more, please. It's my great honor, on behalf of the Gifford Lectureships Committee, to offer some concluding remarks by way of expressing our deep appreciation to Professor Cornel West for this splendid lecture series. Now more than 135 years old, our Gifford Lectureship at the University of Edinburgh has featured the world's most renowned scholar teachers, who have addressed in their lectures the most profound questions relating to our natural universe, our human condition, the foundations of ethics and morals. And Professor West has brought added luster to this distinguished company. He has given us a powerful, eloquent series of lectures on a jazz-soaked philosophy for our catastrophic times. His lectures, reflecting profound learning and analysis, have been presented with prophetic fire, a deep compassion, a warm humanity, and sometimes a deep laughter, sometimes deep tears. He has held his audiences spellbound, and he has made the Gifford Lectures swing. His Gifford Lectures have addressed the most crucial of questions. How can we live as mature, dignified, empathetic, caring, truth-telling people in a world so corrupted by greed, cruelty, lies, and oppression? How can we rise above our human weaknesses and limitations to become something better? Not only better individuals, but better members of society, able to love and care and sacrifice for others. How can we, when confronted by injustice and oppression, profound inequality, the arrogance of wealth and power, the evils of fascism and racism, unspeakable suffering, unbearable tragedy, how can we find the courage to rise above despair and cynicism? How can we find the strength to resist evil? The questions involve the very foundations of what it means to be human and the very survival of our humanity. Because we're living, Professor West reminds us, in catastrophic times. We've seen the end of the European empires. We're now witnessing the end of the American empire. There are dislocations, genocidal warfare, racist hatreds, ecological devastation, the specter of nuclear annihilation. It is, Professor West's word, a grim and dim moment of spiritual decay and moral decadence. It can feel like the end time. Catastrophe is real, not overpowering, but also not a mere problem to be solved. We're confronted by death, dogma, and domination. And how can we find the practical wisdom and courage to respond? And the way, Professor West tells us, lies within us and around us. We have innate capacities for good. We can pursue excellence and heroic action. We can live for others. We can sacrifice for others. We are, to be sure, flawed, struggling, suffering, wounded creatures, but there is something. And here there's something transformative, something miraculous, because we can rise up and be more than we are, and sometimes do more than could ever seem possible. We've seen so many examples of wounded healers in these lectures, and I will simply mention one. In 1955, Mrs. Mamie Till, looking on the tortured, mutilated body of her son, Emmett, murdered by white racists, said, "I will seek justice all my days, but I will not hate." And how can we find that kind of inner strength? How can we fortify ourselves for moral action? Well, we find help from others, family, friends, communities. But as Professor West has shown us too, we have immense resources to draw upon in the great minds and the large souls of our past. We're parts of a society, and our moral sense is realized in communion with others. And here, Professor West shares a similar approach with our Scottish moralists of the 18th and 19th century, of Francis Hutcheson, Adam Smith, David Hume, Thomas Chalmers, broken vessels, to be sure, but who nonetheless wrote so eloquently about our moral sense, which is only cultivated and realized through our social interactions. And this is the tradition in which Adam Gifford was educated and which he hoped his Gifford Lectures would build upon. And how magnificently Professor West has done this. In these Gifford Lectures, Professor West developed what he has termed a jazz-soaked philosophy, a philosophy to help us through our catastrophic times. It's a philosophy drawing upon the prodigious contributions of Socrates and Plato in education and the cultivation of empathy. It's a philosophy given a tragic turn in the Renaissance thought of Erasmus and Montaigne, given a historical consciousness and a sense of contingency through the work of Vico, given an enhanced sense of the catastrophic in the work of Eugene O'Neill and T.S. Eliot with their struggle against nihilism and despair. And above all, shaped by Professor West's own freestyle, African-American musical tradition of blues, swing, and improvisation. And this latter tradition was forged, we've learned, among a people suffering 400 years of the most appalling race hatred, slavery, and cruelty, and yet who, through music and poetry and love, have found a way to go on living, fighting, laughing, crying, swinging, and singing, to use Professor West's words. This jazz-soaked philosophy is committed to lifting up every voice, and it found a transcendent expression in John Coltrane and his Love Supreme. It's committed to teaching the world about love, about a deep love. This has been a memorable series, an incomparable series. Every lecture has been an intellectual tour de force, incredibly rich in illustrations from history, philosophy, literature, poetry, theater, and music. It's inspired us to go back to the sources to try to think more deeply. A few days ago, my colleague, Professor Leslie McCara, described it as a "were you there" moment. People, she suggested, will be asking, were you there? Were you there when Professor Cornel West delivered those Gifford Lectures in 2024? Well, we will remember. And we'll also be asking, did those lectures not change you? Did they not help you to see more clearly, give you more hope, and strengthen you for action to change this world for the better? A moment more, please. There are many to thank this evening. It takes a village to produce such a Gifford Lecture Series. And on behalf of the Gifford Committee, and I'm looking to my colleague, Professor Moni Siddiqui, who brought this nomination forward, thank you. On behalf of the Gifford Committee, let me express our gratitude to Union Theological Seminary in New York City for their support of Professor West as he prepared these lectures and for sharing him with us these past weeks. We wish to thank the chairpersons of the individual lectures, the bloggers who have prepared their informed, thoughtful, critical commentaries on each lecture, the panelists, Professor Jeffrey Stout and Dr. David Kim, who traveled so far to be with us and to share their great learning, their great wisdom at our Royal Society of Edinburgh Gifford seminar yesterday. We thank the designers and publicity experts, Ms. Ashley Mall and the many colleagues who've volunteered their time to support each lecture, the many technical experts who've assisted with live streaming and recording. Let me express a special appreciation to Ms. Natasha Collinson in our college office, who behind the scenes has administered the Gifford Lectures so efficiently, and also to Ms. Molly McCracken, our Gifford social media host. Thank you. We also thank the audiences for your attention and your thoughtful questions. But above all, we thank our distinguished Gifford lecturer. It has been a great pleasure, a great honor to have Professor West back with us in Edinburgh these past 2 weeks. And it's been an added pleasure that to have his wife, Professor Anahita Madhavi West, also with us. You have both been so generous with your time, and Edinburgh has taken you to heart. You've left some heaven behind with us. Cornel and Anahita, thank you. And we've also been greatly warmed by the many friends who've come to join you from afar and have become our friends. Thank you. We have some gifts, just small things to remember us by, remember us and your time with us. We wish you a safe trip home. We hope, we look forward to your coming back, and we hope you will come back perhaps as President of the United States. Wouldn't that? And again, Cornel, our very warmest thanks for a superb series of Gifford Lectures. And now, could you all please come outside for a drinks reception to celebrate with Cornel and Anahita this memorable Gifford Lecture Series.
Thank you so much.
Oh my God.
Thank you so much.